let me just go back and say I am talking with Professor Randall Balmer, and we are transitioning to talk about this book, Saving Faith. And I want to also go back to your sports book because I like so much of that. But, you're talking about the fact that many people blame faith for the rampant secularization of society in recent decades, while critics contend that Christians themselves, or at least their leaders, are blind to their own shortcomings. Some and this is what we're talking about now, of the proposed remedies to appeal to nostalgia, which you were talking about, an attempt to undermine the separation of church and state, trying to throttle religious diversity, and asserting the supposed, quote, Christian origins of the nation are historically misguided and would only deepen the crisis facing Christianity. So what I wanted to jump to is that if you had had that on the back of your book as a blurb 20 years ago, people would have just said, well, this has nothing to do with where we are now. We're moving away from this, and these are not really relevant discussions. How crazy is it that your book, Saving Faith, inadvertently is torn from the headlines and is front page news in America right now? And every other day I read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Guardian, whatever. There's an article that is something to do with what you're talking about of, hey, what happened to these, quote, these Christians? Where are they going? What do they represent? Are they really evangelical? Are they even Christian anymore? Why is this part of the gun cult? Why is this part of Christian nationalism? How does this fit in with Viktor Orban of Hungary? Why is Vladimir Putin on their side? Why does Tucker Carlson, do all this? I just think it's crazy that you're teaching history and you do religion and you're this expert up there. And then all of a sudden, Randall Balmer is front page news with talk about what happened to Christianity.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure.
What happened to the secularization of our culture that was all going to be reason and documentaries on evolution all the way down. And all of a sudden it's religion nonstop 24/7. And we're in an election year.
Yeah. And what kind of religion is it? What's the quality of religion? I guess that's the thing that interests me is what is the quality of religion we're talking about? What is the quality of faith we're talking about? And I have to say that I don't find many corners where there's much I find encouraging. Come back to this evangelical pursuit of the cult of Donald Trump. I mean, I guess I'm going to ask you a question. Are you as confounded by this as I am? It defies all reason to me.
Yeah.
How this happened. Now, having said that, I just wrote a lecture that I'm going to be giving in South Carolina in a couple of months, trying to explain it. And I came up with 5 turning points. I'll see if I can remember them quickly. That I think kind of pointed in this direction. First was the Immigration Act of 1965. Which removed the quotas from the Johnson-Reed Act of 1924 and opened the country to immigrants, particularly from Asia and South Asia. And I know you've seen this as well, but in my lifetime, I've seen Buddhist stupas and Shinto shrines and Hindu temples crop up in the most unlikely places. I never would have imagined this. It's part of the diversity. And I think a lot of white Christians, particularly evangelicals, said, this is a threat. This is somehow something we're not comfortable with. The second turning point, I think, is a court decision I've written about quite a bit, as you know, the Green v. Connolly decision of 1971, that was the genesis for the religious right because it challenged the tax-exempt status of segregated evangelical schools.
And you talk about how Paul Weyrich and other people jumped on that.
Exactly.
Made it a thing.
I think the third important moment was the fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1979, because the Southern Baptist Convention had been kind of the watchman on the wall of the wall of separation between church and state. And then they abandoned that entirely. And so we have, everybody's chipping away at that wall, including the Supreme Court these days. I think the fourth was Ronald Reagan's rescission of the fairness doctrine in broadcasting, so that you have all these nutcases out there, spouting conspiracy nonsense and things like that. And in the past, they would have had to have offered equal time to someone to refute that sort of thing. And now we don't have that at all. And I think the final thing was 1981, the federal agents invaded or raided a small town in northern Idaho called Wallace, Idaho. And that led in turn to the Ruby Ridge thing, and then finally to the Branch Davidian thing in Waco. And that persuaded a lot of white evangelicals that the government was overreaching and was intruding on their lives and freedom and that sort of thing. Now, I think it's all overblown, but I think those are some of the steps that led us to this moment, particularly with this movement called Christian nationalism.
Do you think that those steps parallel the kind of general secularization in another time and place of European versions of Christianity? Is that just a trend? I mean, is this the age of science and the bill comes due one way or another? And in America, it has this odd twist of the politicizing of religion to the point where it's no longer religion, but a kind of a nationalism. I mean, how do you see this? Or is America kind of unique and different than other places?
My sense, again, you lived in Europe, Frank, and I never have, so you probably have a different perspective on this. My sense with Europe is that World War II was really devastating. I mean, not merely in terms of destruction and casualties, but in the sense of destroying any sort of faith in something transcendent. I mean, I mean, Elie Wiesel's novel Night, I mean, is a beautiful example of that. How can you believe in God after Auschwitz? Now, I'm not speaking that for myself because I do still believe in God, but I think for people who went through and saw close up the horrors of Hitler and the Holocaust, I think that probably accelerated the move towards secularism and secularization. And we in the United States haven't had quite that same moment, I don't think.